All right, so joining me here today, we've got the star of Cop and a Half, Norman D. Golden II. Norman, how you doing today?
I'm great. I'm great. How are you, Harry?
Not too bad, not too bad. So, gotta say, big fan of Cop and a Half. I think I've been watching it for bordering maybe upon 20 years at this point. I remember watching it on my iPhone screen when I was very young, and then, yep, I've had it on DVD, watched it a good couple of times since. So, quite a big fan to have you here. And I've got
Well,
to ask, so what was it for you the first time that you actually saw Cop and a Half on the big screen and saw yourself as the star of a Hollywood movie? How did that feel?
oh, it felt weird because to this day, I don't really like to watch myself on screen. So it was really weird. But with the weirdness, it was a great feeling because it really took me back to all of like the different scenes and like the locations and the actual time spent making the film. So it was like looking through like an old photo album, just but like in real time, for 90 minutes or so. It was a really cool feeling, other than once I got past the like the cringiness of like, oh, watching myself and hearing myself.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, this film was shot in Burt Reynolds. He had requested an area in Florida that it was shot. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was shot around Tampa, St. Petersburg area.
That's
Yeah.
it. So were you a local around Tampa, or did they have to send you over there for filming?
No, yeah, they flew me out. It was like a 3 or 4 month shoot. And yeah, because I'm based in LA. So
Right.
yeah.
No, cool. And how did you find working with Henry Winkler as a director on that one?
It was interesting. Henry Winkler, I believe that was one of the first or maybe his first directorial roles. So I think, with that said, there's a lot of figuring out. I mean, Henry had been, an actor for several years, from his days, Happy Days, and, in the 70s and all that stuff. So I think he had a good grasp of like, working with actors, but then like when you're actually in that position, it's a little different. I mean, as a kid, you know, it when you're a kid and you have an adult like giving you direction, that's pretty much your life. You have your parents, your teachers, whomever, aunts, uncles, so it was an extension of that. I mean, as I grow up and I reflect on the situation, um, there was, and this is nothing like negative or bad about Henry Winkler. There's just as I started to move on with other roles, I could see where there was there was like a learning curve. I feel that he maybe was still kind of getting through. But as far as, and that's just from a technical, actor standpoint. I mean, as far as our working relationship and his treatment of me, like nothing less than stellar. I mean, he was a great guy. I enjoyed working with him. It just, again, like I said, in hindsight, a lot of the things he would he would do, he was kind of Kubrick style sometimes there, where it's like, we'd finish a shot, a scene, and he's like, yeah, or a shot of a scene, and he's like, yeah, it's great, perfect. One more time. And then one more time would turn into like five more times, or maybe even 16 more times. And we're like, I remember once Bert, he said that, and Bert was like, well, you can't get any better than perfect, I don't think. So yeah, it was just those little things were an adjustment, but overall, good guy. Nothing really to complain about.
Cool. And so I've seen that as your career has progressed, you've started moving towards behind the camera a little bit. So now that you've kind of got that more fresh perspective of what goes into the making of a film from being both in front of the camera and behind it from also, an adult lens. Yeah, how do you reflect on Winkler's direction as a more informed adult now?
Excuse me. Yeah, like I was saying before, I think he was still trying to figure out, I guess the role as the director when you're actually in those shoes. I think he had uh, a vision for Cop and a Half and maybe the direction that he wanted to take it. Um, but there may not have been uh, enough space for allowing, the actors to kind of, take over. And I think veteran directors understand that there's, yes, you have to have a very tight, uh, detailed idea of what plan of what you want to shoot, but then you have to leave because that's where if you're telling your actors what to do, then it's like, well, why? When do I get a chance to explore my talent? So, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. You know, like with Burt Reynolds, for example, this man has acted and directed at that point in over 50 films.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of times when, Burt Reynolds would say, hey, well, why don't we try it this way? And Henry's like, well, yeah, we can, but da da da. And not to say that, because he was the director. So, the way that it works is like a director is in charge of the show. When you're on set, the director is the number one person and you take their direction.
Yeah.
You know, however, when you have one or nil projects to your name and you're talking to a person who has directed, if he's been in over 50 films, I think he directed over half a dozen. Even if it was a half dozen, he's got a lot more of that experience under your belt. You have to, I feel like there's a obligation in a sense to say, okay, well, let me hear what you have to say. In my case, um, as a kid, I just kind of, I was like in the movie, there's a line where one of the bad guys says, like, I was a kid once and I saw everything. And I can totally, as an adult, like I can relate to that line because I remember, Bert and Henry having these, back and forth conversations. And then, usually it was about me insofar as like Bert would be pleading to Henry to just like let Norman do his thing. I mean, this kid is brilliant for his age and what he does. Like, we can have some comedy gold here if you just kind of let him, you know, be an actor, like
Yeah.
what we hired. So that was, again, looking back on it and, seeing there are some areas of improvement or, things that could have gone a little different. But again, overall, like Cop and a Half, I mean, it turned out to be, uh, I mean, I would say for the time and for the age group, like a great film. Um, yeah, it's just, looking back in hindsight, like some of the outtakes and thinking of some of the outtakes, it's like, wow, if we had, when I look at the film now, I look at some of the scenes like, wow, if we had been able to do that one take that we did with this film would have been, it probably would have been an entirely different film. That was with a lot of different scenes. So, again, no disrespect to Henry whatsoever. It's just, that happens a lot of times when you're fresh to something or whatnot. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you for the detail. Anyway, well, talking about Burt Reynolds now, there's been a lot of stories throughout Burt Reynolds' career about him being allegedly a difficult person to work with during production, and a number of those stories have come from production of Cop and a Half. But the story goes that apparently he was very kind to you on set. Now, do you have any stories about working with him, or could you shed some light about perhaps his on-set antics, anything like that?
Um, you know, yeah, Burt Reynolds from, my perspective, and I've heard the stories, as I grew up, I've heard the stories as well. But, in my memory recollection, he was a class act. I mean, this guy um has definitely, even at the time of filming Cop and a Half, I mean, his career had spanned decades. Um, I think what when people hear that someone is difficult, this is just with anything, not just with celebrities. There's always it's always in the eye of the beholder. It's always with someone's experience, you know, and I will say that, Bert had a lot going on with him at that particular time. I mean, he was in like a decade long, like slump and kind of roller coaster ride of his career. He had marital issues. So a lot of that will obviously make a person, I mean, you think of times in your life when you're having a lot of like pressure or whatever, you may not necessarily be the nicest person.
Yep.
This is in no way of me making excuses for him. Like if he was an asshole to someone and it wasn't warranted, then that's not cool. But I'm also speaking from the standpoint of, being an entertainment professional and having been in the industry and knowing how, there's a lot of disingenuous people in the industry. And, that's a lot of people won't admit to that because it's like, well, I don't want to be blackballed or look seen as difficult, when, Bert's like telling it like it is, and they're like, well, why? Oh, he's all of a sudden he's difficult. It's no, he was a very genuine guy, and he knew that he was around a lot of people that was only around him for who he was. So he just was like, I don't really respond to that. I respond to genuine people. And myself, I was a kid, so I had that purity, and my parents being genuine people, trying, their hardest to raise a genuine person, which I think they succeeded. um that's who he gravitated to. I'll give you one story. We were at a restaurant during filming, and it was, we were on a lunch break, and the owner of the restaurant actually knew, filming was in town. We were close to his restaurant, so he made his way to set to invite us. Well, he invited Bert to set, but Bert wanted to have lunch with us that particular day because sometimes we would do that. We'd have lunch together and whatnot. He'd invite my parents, and obviously I was there because they're my parents. So we go to the restaurant. And the guy closes the restaurant down. He's like, yeah, Bert, like I would love, when next time you're in town, let me buy you lunch. And so Bert, he looks at the guy and he's like, dude, like I can buy your restaurant. Like you want to buy me lunch? Like why don't you buy some of those guys that, the assistant directors keep trying to kick off set, the homeless people. They're just trying to come in and get something to eat, and they keep kicking them off set. Like go buy those people some lunch. I don't need you to buy me lunch. And so of course people would look at that like, wow, I'm just trying to buy you lunch. But the point being is like, listen, dude, if I wasn't Burt Reynolds, would you want to buy me lunch?
Mm.
Just like, hey, let's keep it real here. Yeah.
Okay. No, that certainly shines quite a bit of alignment. So yeah, again, thank you for the detail. Now, so getting into the actual content of Cop and a Half itself, one thing I've always wondered watching the movie is how much of the script did you stick to, and did they give you much room to improvise? Because I felt like there was a lot of comic energy in your performance, and I felt like maybe a bit of it was improvised, but was that you, or was that, you were sticking to the screenplay there?
Um, Basically, like I was saying before, with particularly with Henry's directing style, um, there wasn't a lot of room for ad libbing. So a lot of what you guys seen was scripted. But that's the magic of acting, and that's, I guess the difference between, I guess if I'm tooting my own horn here, myself and Bert's, that's the difference between good actors and actors that are, because, well, I don't want to say good actors. There's actors that are really good at sticking to the script and making it pop, in their own way, and then there's actors that can ad lib and just go off this, and they shine better that way. And if you gave them a script, they would know what to do with themselves. Um, Interestingly enough, Burt Reynolds is amazing. Uh, he loves to riff and ad lib. I mean, you look at Smokey and the Bandit and you hear some of the stories about Smokey and the Bandit. Most of that film was ad libbed. I mean, they had a script because they had to have a schedule and a budget and timeline to follow, but most of it was just, okay, we're in the moment, let's feel it. And so there were times in Cop and a Half where we did that, and we would try. I think Burt Reynolds would try to do it as often as possible because he saw that I was capable of, even at such a young age, that I was capable of following him. But a lot of times, Henry would kind of step in and say, well, it's not scripted, this, that, and the other. And he's like, okay. And then there were times when Burt Reynolds was like, hey, let this kid go because he's like, this is brilliant. One scene that happened was when I was on the phone in the office and I'm saying, bring the kid, I mean, bring the, criminal back to jail when you arrest him. Don't go like none of that was scripted. That was all me.
Nice.
Uh, yeah. And it was a scene that it was a part that Bert wanted me. Oh, excuse me. I had that on silent. Um, I'll retract. So there was a scene in Cop and a Half when I was on the phone saying, "Bring the kid back. Bring the criminal back when you arrest him." So that was all ad-libbed. And that scene came about because there was another scripted portion of that, but it was really, I mean, keeping it real, in hindsight, it was kind of corny. And so Bert and I were, that was a scene that we were gonna shoot after something we'd already shot. And I was like asking him about it, and he's like, "Well, maybe let's see what would you do in this particular moment." And then so I proceeded to like say, "Well, maybe I can." He's like, "Shh, don't tell me. Just go in there and do what you want to do." So I went in there and I'm like acting like I'm a police sergeant, and I'm behind the desk and yada yada yada. And unbeknownst to me, they were actually filming a lot of it. And so he came in, he said, "Okay, cool. So we're gonna do a couple takes." And so then I kind of remembered a little bit about what I was doing, and that's how that scene came about. And he's like, "Okay, we're gonna roll." And so they just let me talk. It was other stuff that I did, but that particular portion made it to the final cut. Yeah. So to answer your question, I hope that kind of to sum it up, like, yeah, a lot of it was scripted, some of it was improvised, but for me personally as an actor, like it's really fun when you can, take something that's kind of is established already and then just kind of riff. That's where the magic happens.
Absolutely, yeah. So, in terms of like the filming experience and all that, so in the final product of Cop and a Half, do you have like any favorite scenes or any scenes you remember shooting that you had particularly like fond memories for that stood out?
Oh yeah, definitely. The boat scenes were
Of
great because
course.
I actually got a chance to drive. So imagine they go like, "Oh, I can drive." So yeah, that was amazing. The boat scenes. Let's see. Believe it or not, my interaction with the bullies
Yeah.
were fun. Because they were pretty nice guys. I mean, one of the bullies was actually the kid from Clarissa Explains It All. So he's like
Oh,
a really nice guy, but they were like, they were bullies. So it was fun to like, mess around on set and play around and then like boom, action and they're just like going in on me like not like nothing terrible, but you know what I mean, like for the scene, it's just that was fun to play with and to see that dynamic. Let's see. Yeah, so the bully scenes, the boat scenes, uh and pretty much I mean, I had a lot of scenes with Bert. We were riding in the car, the the drawbridge scene, that was fun. Um, it both is it's interesting because Bert as a guy that has done a lot of stunts in
yeah.
his career, that was one of the scenes that he was quite nervous about. And I think he was nervous because of me, because he's like, okay, I got this kid here and this car is attached to this drawbridge by cables and like it's safe. It's safe because they spent a few days like planning the scene, but he knows he knows a thing or two about a stunt going wrong. I mean, in City Heat when he was cracked over the head and was knocked unconscious, and so he's like, I'm a little nervous. So we had this like, because he asked me, he's like, so what do you think about being in a car that's like, because they told me that particular scene, like, yeah, we just have like two cables that are like spinning this car. And I'm like, what? Yeah, so that was, but it was fun. He made it fun. We, made a lot of jokes around it. But I remembered that. And that was actually for that particular, that was like the last shot of the day. So it was his whiskey shot, and because I was young, I came up with the different slogan. So mine was it was the cheeseburger shot, which meant at the end of every like the last shot of every day, you'd go and have a shot of whiskey or a cheeseburger. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know that. They call that the martini shot, at least on the productions that I've worked on.
There you go. Yeah, so yeah, it's the same. Yeah, martini shot. He used to call his the whiskey shot, and that was a cheeseburger shot for me.
Well, fair enough. I think that sounds pretty appropriate considering the circumstances of your age and everything at the time. Now,
Yeah, I
cool.
was gonna say considering because now it's definitely the whiskey shot.
That's completely fair enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, now, so you were saying earlier that Cop and a Half came off as a really good film for its time, and I would agree with that. I thought that in my research for Cop and a Half, I kind of drew comparisons between films like It and say Stop or My Mum Will Shoot or the Sinbad film House Guest, because I feel like they're all kind of very uplifting, very feel good, and they've got that very kind of classy musical score that gives the movie a kind of lighthearted charm. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of works really well in its favor. But I find Cop and a Half particularly interesting because I think that during the period of time between when it came out and say currently, there's been a very big cultural shift in the perception of police officers and their relationship with the public. And I was kind of curious, did you have any kind of perspective on, how Cop and a Half has, say, aged given that kind of shift in the cultural landscape?
Oh, that is a great question. I think I think it's aged well, and only because of the performances that, Bert and myself uh had given.
Yep.
It's a film that's, it's meant to be lighthearted. But there is, quite naturally, okay, this black kid wants to be a cop. And as you can see, just, historically, even within the last 5 years or so, that's not something that like basically like you said, it doesn't age well. But if we were to dissect, I mean, it's a comedy films, but if we were to dissect, like, okay, the subject matter, I mean, the police departments, or the way that police the police organization was structured. I mean, it wasn't structured with people like myself in mind. In fact, there's a documentary out that's called Police, which I think is actually, if you want to check it out, or anybody that's watching this or whatever want to check it out, I highly recommend you checking it out because it gives like an expose to the actual history of police officers and whatnot. So I think in general, a black kid or black person wanting to be a cop is like, well, yeah, it's a little, it being a cop wasn't, it was designed to like keep you like in your place, so it's a little bit like, no matter if it was back then or even now. However, I think the good thing that Cop and a Half does is it allows for children to have a dream, maintain that dream, and actually go after it. Because it's like, hey, if you want to be a cop, even if you're black and you know that this organization is meant to kind of like oppress you, well, now, we're in a completely different, system or organization, different climate. You know what I mean? So it's like dream your dream. That's okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, and this is a whole nother topic, systemically, there's things that there's still a lot left to be desired in terms of, fairness and all that stuff. But if that's another conversation, the conversation is how does, you know, Cop and a Half, I mean, I guess the positive aspect of what Cop and a Half does as it pertains to young black kids watching it and seeing, someone on screen that looks like them, that's portraying, something that maybe they want to do. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've had a lot of people, come from actors to people that are, in law enforcement, you know, come to me and say, "But hey, that film made a difference in, my career path." So
Nice.
for me, it's like, mission accomplished. Like if I, my ultimate goal, as an artist, to always be able to, affect change on some level and inspire. And because that's what it's meant to do. You see something and you're touched, moved, or inspired by it,
Yeah.
or it sparks, some sort of thought. So yeah, I think that despite the historical, I guess, weight or gravity that might hold, for its intended purpose, being a film and something that's kind of whimsical, comedy, lighthearted, I think it definitely did its job. In that note with the story, interestingly enough, my wife and I were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. There was this guy, we ended up going to a luau, and there was a guy from like, well, no, he lived in Michigan, but he was from Florida. And so, we're talking and, we're getting into backgrounds, and he and his wife were there as well. And so it was mentioned that I was, in the film. I think, ironically, I think his wife recognized me, which is wild because even to this day, like when people recognize me, it's kind of like, well, that was so long ago. How do you know? But people say you look like in here, you look exactly the same. So she's like, yeah, you look like the kid from the movie. And I was like, yeah, that's me. So her husband, the guy, he like just started looking at me and he's like, you have no idea how many times I've watched that movie as a kid. And he's like, I'm a cop now, and I'm a cop because of you.
Oh, that's beautiful. That must be
Yeah,
really
and
nice to hear.
yeah, and not that it has a lot to do with, but this is a white guy from they lived in Michigan. And he's like, yeah, your performance in Cop and a Half, you and Burt Reynolds, like that was, and so he's telling us all these hilarious stories of things that he went through when he was in the police academy. And, he's like, thank you for, inspiring, what has been an amazing career for me. So for me, that's what it's all about.
No, that's really good. And yeah, I very much agree. I think the most wonderful thing about Cop and a Half is that it's this wild, rambunctious children's fantasy. And that I think, kids really can identify with it in a number of ways.
Yeah.
I think the scene I probably relate to the hardest is the bit where Devon pulls over his principal and has the full jurisdiction to give him a speeding fine and all that. And that just made
Mhm.
me think I did not get on with my teachers as a kid. And if I had the opportunity to do that, I definitely would have. So I can see
Yeah.
identifying with Devon as well. And I think that's really what makes the film so nice. So yeah. Anyway, have you by any chance had a chance to see the direct to DVD sequel, Cop and a Half New Recruit?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay.
I
So
keep telling myself, one of these days I'll get around to looking at it. I haven't seen it. I mean, in part because I just haven't really taken the time to see it. It's not that I'm not interested in watching it. I have been instructed by some really like staunch fans of mine. Like, no, you shouldn't see it because it's like one guy went as far as to say it's like it's an abomination to cop and a half. I'm like, whoa, okay, it's it's pretty serious, but I guess he's like, but no, it's like as a fan of the original film, I just don't think that they should have done it without you or at least Bert or something. It just didn't have the same, you know, spark. So no, I haven't seen it. I'm curious though. I'm curious to see what it's about, or what it how it pans out, how it screens. But yeah, no, I haven't seen it yet.
Beautiful. So, Norman, I'm curious. Lately, it looks like you've been moving behind the camera a little bit as producer and writer. So, I'm curious, what kind of other projects have you been up to lately?
Yeah, so I produced a short film. One of my first short films that I've produced and completed was entitled Misperception, and it's actually about this teenager who gets kind of caught up in wrong place, wrong time scenario. But he's hanging around a bad bunch because he's in the environment. where there's, a lot of crazy things happening. Um, and so instead of getting jail time, he's sentenced to police aid ride along program, where he's able to see now both sides of, you know, law enforcement, the things that he was kind of getting into or wasn't, or just, around that element. And then also what the cops, have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so from that, he starts to kind of formulate his own, and, to back up, he has this like F the police kind of a mentality. But then when he's actually on the force and he's on the force with someone who is from his same neighborhood, understands the struggle, and he's starting to see like, whoa, okay, this is your job is not that easy, and it's more than just your job not being easy. It's like he can really see like, the annals of human nature, with that job. So it's I think it's a film that definitely is necessary. Harkening back to our conversation about, especially African Americans in the law enforcement community and that relationship and how it's been strained so long. I mean, it's definitely a conversation starter, which is what it's meant to do. Um, so that was a short film that we produced. We're looking to get that expanded into a TV show. We have a pilot and a pitch deck and all that stuff that we've been, fine tuning the last few years for. So that's, working on moving forward with that. And then my other one of my other short films produced. These are two that I've actually produced, and they've been released as shorts on platforms like Amazon Prime, and one of them I believe the team launched it on YouTube, but I think they took it down because of some other reasons. But the other one was called Hollywood Kid, which is basically my story as a former child actor turned writer, producer, and you kind of see like what it's like for a person like myself. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it's like for me. Like, okay, well, you did a movie with like Burt Reynolds, and you were in a movie with Oprah Winfrey, and you were in a movie with this one and that one. Can't you just like call them and say, hey, I want to act, like put me in your next film? And it's like, no, not that simple. A lot of people now are starting to understand, really how the entertainment industry is kind of built and structured, so they understand like, okay, well, if I don't see someone for a while, it's not because maybe they don't want to do it anymore. It's just, could be some politics. So that short film kind of dives a little deeper into, what it's like for a person like myself who, wants to pursue the career, but it's like you're, in Hollywood, it's like you're only as good as, what you did 6 months ago. And if you haven't worked in 20 years as an actor, you have a fan base, you have a lot of people that know your name, even in the industry. It's like, oh yeah, I know who you are, but it's, translating that into work is, easier said than done.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'll mention when you said that your short had come out on Amazon Prime, I was struggling to hold back some laughter there because I could hear young little Devin Butler saying prime time when you said that.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And well, I guess there's one final question. So I saw that you've also branched out into performing as a rapper under the name Enormus, and I was curious, are you still actively involved in that scene? Do you have any shows coming up there? What's happening with Enormous?
Full transparency. That was definitely um a phase. I want to expound on that a little bit. It was a well concerted effort to act on, a talent that, has been dormant for many years. So I was able to actually I did an album back in 2006. That album is actually on Spotify. It was
Nice.
an EP, like 8 songs on there. So that's on Spotify. And I did that because, I come from a musical family. And so I'm also musically inclined. I mean, I'm more like writer, writing, singing, and rapping. But it's something that is more of a hobby now. I mean, I still write occasionally. I don't perform anymore, or like professionally anymore, or as much, I should say. You know, every now and then I'll do something just for, a friend or something like that or whatever. But yeah, it was like I said, an effort to, see how I could emerge, but I think I kind of lost interest in the professional pursuit and just wanted to keep it more so close to the heart. So I still write and produce music, just not, you know, on a professional level. Like, not like with film and television projects.
Okay, fair enough. And I think well, I might just have one last question here. Do you still keep in touch with anyone that you worked with from Copenhagen?
No. Wow, unfortunately, the only people that are living or alive, uh, I'm thinking about the producers, like Paul Maslansky's still alive. He's one of the producers, but I haven't spoken to him since like the premiere. Henry Winkler, he's still alive, but I haven't spoken to him at all since about, I think, 96, 97 was the last time we communicated. Obviously, Bert has passed on.
Yep.
Rest in peace. Yeah, I think that's about it that I can think of right now. Everyone else is either like, passed on, or they're just kind of, we just kind of lost contact. So yeah.
Fair enough. Well, I guess that about wraps it up then. Well, thank you so much for your time, Norman, for all the detailed answers and everything. This has been wonderful to get a perspective on everything that's happened behind the scenes, and I guess I'll leave you to it from there. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day.
All right, you as well. Thank you.